This will be the JavaScript Tester 1 evaluation. I'm just going to go through the bullet points and talk about the different things and then demonstrate with some functions that I wrote for this video. So system under test is just the what a system is going through when it's being tested for correct working properly. And it's like being validated by testers. It's also known as application under test. Usually is in line with others with software that is gone through unit or integration testing, things like that. So it's just a system that's being tested. Arrange, act, and assert phases of a test. So arrange is where you're going to deal with all your setup of your test. So we're talking about any kind of objects does it need? Is there any prepping of a database? Does it need to connect to any kind of application? Anything that does that is going to be in the beginning of your test is going to be the arrange part. Any special settings. And then act is the functions, the modules, the meat of the application that's going to be tested. So this is going to be your API calls, um, any actions that are going to be targeted behavior. That's what we're going to be focused on in the act part. Because the assert part is what we're going to say, what we're going to expect from our act. Because the act is going to give a response, and then that response is a good response, is a bad response. That's all the assert part of the testing. And this is the pattern for, I guess, a good writing, test writing. It's also known as behavior-driven development. Can be arrange, act, assert, or given, when, and then. And then the assertion part is making sure also if it fails or passes. That's the end result part of the testing. So unit integration, end-to-end acceptance testing. So unit testing is the testing of individual functions, the little parts that make everything work. It's what's the purpose of testing the little tiny parts of the application to make sure that the smallest few inputs produce like a single output. So everything is working properly at the smallest level. Integration testing is to verify like everything's working together, like multiple components, modules, making sure that if you're testing if one module changes, does it affect another module? And if it does, throw an error, make sure that they're working together. And then testing is testing, just clicking testing, like a person goes through there and just does every little thing, inputs, checks, and just verifies everything's working from beginning to end and then. So it's just kind of like a robot going through performing tasks, making sure each task goes properly. And acceptance testing is the end testing. So like a client or somebody who represents the business side or the business, making sure the business needs are set or accomplished when they do this test. It's kind of like the end test to make sure that everything's good to go for the application. And then we're going to do some demonstrations of the functions and testing over here on this side, and that should explain the rest of these bullet points. And I'll go through a couple of different tests here and talk about what I did. So for this, I'm using Jest and Axios for some API call stuff. And those are, I'll show my package.json. It's a dev dependency is Jest and a dependency Axios. So what I did was we created this functions, and I created these individual functions here just to explain a little bit of the different tests and the methods, I guess, that come with the test suites that you can use in order to see if all your code and data is running properly. And so I'll just, the functions, here's a couple like add, is null, check value, create user. And then over here, we also created a functions.test.js, which is exactly like the functions, but you just got to put the .test in there so that it knows what to look for. And then you're doing your export and your import of your functions here. So add our test, we're going to write test here because that's what we're going to, it knows what to look for. And we're going to say 2 plus 2 should be 4 to test our add. We're going to throw in a function that expects, this is another part of the test, expect, and what we're going to expect is our functions add, they're taking our 2 arguments here, 2 and 2, and we're going to use this, which is supplied with the test suites, which is 2b, pretty straightforward, 4, our primitive. This is 2b is to be used for checking and getting a primitive in return. So we test this, we're pulling in this function, it's going to take these numbers, insert them in here, run the function, expect the same outcome to be 4 if we put this 2 and 2 to be there. And if we run our tests down here, you can see everything's passing except for this one that's failed, which is a reverse string function that we'll fix here in a second. And so these are just essentially the same things. It works the same way. You do your test, your explanation, your function, your expect, and then your function you want to be tested and what you want your outcome to be. You can do a dot not, which will essentially be the opposite of to be, or so it'll say 2 plus 2 is dot not to be 5, right? Because it's going to be 4. If it's 5, we want it to be true in this sense in order to get this to be a function to true out. Because if we was to leave 4 in there, it would be false, because not to be 4 would be false, because it would be 4. It's because some of these, like to be falsy, to be truthy, if it was only to be falsy and they didn't have this to be truthy method, I suppose, you could put a dot not to be, and it would be the opposite or different than to be falsy. So we have here null is null, to be null. We have to be falsy, to be truthy. This is a return true and false. Things like undefined, null, 0, maybe. I'd have to look that one up. Sorry about that one. And then, like a string, number, something that would be like actual true or a value. And then we have our to equal. This is used because if you're going to be checking arrays, you can't use the to be because it's only return checks primitives. So in order to do that, you have to use a to equal, which will run through and test for the same through arrays. And then you can also run tests that are not functions in your functions. You can run them on their separate terms to just see if you need or will use them. So we did the greater than or less than. And like I said, a lot of these are self-explanatory. If you go to the documentation, to be less than or equal, to be greater than or equal, you throw in your arguments and you can just test. To not match arrays, you can check to see if they contain certain objects, like just documentation. You can see all these different utilities that you get that you can use to test. It's all part of the suite. It's just a matter of how you want to get the data in there and expect what to be the same thing. Because you can have usernames that don't have usernames in your documentation, and then use these values and inject them into the function. That's part of that setup part that I was talking about. Assertions. This is, from what I understand, has to do with doing promises and returning multiple expectations. So if you're going to be doing multiple promises and then you're going to run your expect multiple times with this number. This number it expects how many assertions you're going to be returning from your test. So like if you want to return this function here, which is fetch user, which is a promise because you're going to do a get and a dot then and dot catch because you're going to await. So you return your function. It says dot fetch user dot then expect right here to equal this. And so you know to run expect your assertions once because you're only going to return this one expect. And then this is how you would write an async. You do your async function, expect assertions one, same. Oh, and you have to have your return here. When you write it in async, it's different. You don't have to have your return because your return is the right here. So you have your date, which is await, and then you have your function right here, which is returning dot fetch user. And then you test, and it comes out to be okay. So this one that failed, let's do that one right now. We'll go to reverse string. So what we did was we created and the suites is like the different. If I would have put all these functions into function test right here, then it would be one suite. But these are each individual JavaScript files, so we had to do a test file for each one, and these are the different suites. That's why one failed. It's this reverse string.test suite. It's because in here we reverse everything and everything reverses, but the H does not match because it will be still a capital H because our function here in reverse string, it only splits it, reverses it, and joins it. We would need to put in there a maybe dot to lowercase. Then we'll come down here, run our tests. Oh, yep. And it passed. So that's what was the issue, yeah. And that's how you can use that to test your functions for functionality. If you want something to happen and your function's already set up and you need to add something else to it, you can come down here, pass something into your function, see if it equals what you want, what you expect. If it doesn't, go in there and fix your function, or, just an example of how to fix something. Okay, and then we did, where's the chunk? So this is just an example of how to test different types of functions, more complex functions than just the ones in that one test. And right here, we're going to try to take the pieces of each chunk and return our chunks. We have to change our equal because we're doing arrays to 3 if we wanted 3, 4 if we wanted 4. And then we can pass that into this chunk right here function and get our return. And then another one we wrote was the anagram. I wrote an anagram one. This is why you're seeing this console log right here, because I was making sure things were lining up properly. It's essentially takes our strings, reformats them to be alphabetical order, replaces anything that's not a letter, and then checks them against each other if they're within each other, and then returns true. We have a to equal, to be truthy, to be falsy. And these are all just examples of JavaScript testing for an application. And that's it. Thank you.